Hello everyone, this the finale of What If Deku Married Mina, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Lying on his back, Izuku's eyebrows furrowed as the sound of his alarm woke him from his dreams. Groaning, he reached out for his phone and silenced the incessant beeping and sat up. Or at least, he attempted to, but a weight on his chest prevented him from doing so. Craning his neck to look, he saw a mass of pink hair blocking his view of his chest. Mina was currently fast asleep, clutching his arm as she used his chest as a pillow. There was a smile on her face. For a moment, Izuku was incredibly confused. However, as he began to fully awaken, memories of last night came back to him. A smile appeared on his own face as some warmth filled his cheeks. Evidently, Mina was a much heavier sleeper than he was. Deciding to take a bit to enjoy this moment, the groggy boy reached out and gently ran a hand through her hair. She stirred slightly as he gingerly played with her curls, though she remained asleep. She looked so peaceful when she was asleep. A sereneness that one rarely saw when she was awake and active. As he looked upon her, part of him wanted to just skip training so he could stay with her like this all day. But he knew that wasn't an option. Aizawa would kill them if he found out. Hey Mina ? He whispered, shaking her lightly. NNNN, the sleeping girl made a sound but didn't wake. Mina, it's time to get up. He spoke a little louder this time, shaking her again. Don't wanna, she muttered in her sleep, her grip now tightening on his arm. Blushing as the temptation to stay in bed grew, Izuku gave a much firmer shake. Black and yellow eyes fluttered open as they gazed into his. Mornin', Mina mumbled, still half asleep. Her boyfriend stroked the side of her head. We need to get up. Training's in an hour. The girl on his chest let out a small, and adorable, yawn. 5 more minutes ? She asked. Please ? Again, the temptation was definitely there. We really shouldn't. Sighing, Mina slowly sat up. Fine, but I still get to do this, she said before she gave him a quick kiss. You're a good pillow, you know that ? Izuku chuckled. The two eventually got out of bed, Izuku checking to make sure the coast was clear for Mina to leave. He didn't want anyone to see her leaving his room and get the wrong idea. Meet you for breakfast ? Mina asked. Izuku nodded. Sounds good. See you there. They gave each other another kiss. Also, you're really cute when you're sleeping. For a moment, Mina was caught off guard, a bit of magenta in her cheeks. However, it quickly vanished as she smirked. I'm always cute, she said with a wink before heading out the door. Izuku couldn't help but laugh. Well, she wasn't wrong. Gamma Gym was bustling with activity as the students of UA trained. It was the last day before the semester truly started, meaning this would be the last time they could dedicate this much time to quirk extension. Of course, the UA staff had every intention of continuing that training all the way up until the exam, but education was just as important. As usual, the combined hero class had multiple teachers working to assist them. Among them was All Might, though he was mostly there to observe his students' progress as well as offer advice where he could. Though, unsurprisingly, much of his attention was focused on Izuku. The former symbol of peace watched his successor with pride. Izuku was truly began to come into his own. Not only had he learned how to better control one for all, albeit a tiny percentage of it, he was also finally starting to develop his own fighting style. To All Might, seeing his student finally start creating an identity for himself was a wonderful thing. Trying to imitate his idol would only get the boy so far. As he reflected on how much progress his protégé had made, All Might watched as one of Izuku's attacks was intercepted by the ectoplasm clone he was sparring with, who countered and threw him to the ground. Izuku had improved immensely, yes, but he clearly still had a long way to go. All Might continued to observe his class until they were instructed to take a break. During that time, he decided to make his rounds and give some quick feedback to each student individually. It had been something he'd been doing regularly, as he obviously couldn't get directly involved in the training anymore. There was a lot he couldn't do anymore. Still, only his body had been broken, not his spirit. He was still a hero at heart, And he had every intention of making sure he did everything in his power to help the next generation become the best heroes they could be. Even if he had to covertly carry around a teaching for dummies book to do so. I see your shoot style is coming along rather nicely, young Midoriya, All Might said as he reached Izuku. His protege was currently taking a sizable gulp from a water bottle as he sat on a bench. He looked up at the retired pro, putting the bottle aside. Oh, thank you, All Might. Izuku always seemed a little surprised to hear praise, something All Might wasn't sure he liked. The boy was much too hard on himself sometimes. It's getting there. I'm still struggling with a lot of stuff though. He looked down, almost as if he was ashamed. Hey, what have you talked about? Optimism, my boy. The eighth wielder of One for All gave a smile and a thumbs Minasup. You've still got a long and difficult road ahead of you, I know. But don't forget how much of it you've already walked. Think about where you are now compared to when you first arrived here. He didn't want to mention anything specific about One for All with so many people around. Right. Izuku looked up, a more determined look on his face. That's what I want to see. All Might tried to avoid giving the green-haired boy any special treatment, but the fact of the matter was he had promised to dedicate himself to him. After all, his hero days were no more, giving him plenty of time to be a mentor now. And because of that, it was imperative now more than ever that Izuku grow stronger. All for One was defeated, yes, but he seemed to have been training a successor of his own. Shigaraki, along with the rest of the League of Villains, was still out there, and still a major threat to society. The group had carried out 2 successful attacks on UA, demonstrating the danger they posed. On top of that, villains were on the rise thanks to Stain's ideology. The symbol of peace was no longer around to put society at ease and keep the villains at bay, and heroes everywhere were doing what they could to fill the hole All Might had left. With things the way they were, Izuku, along with the rest of UA's students, needed to be prepared as best they could. It was why they were even being given the chance to earn provisional licenses in the first place. Am I interrupting something? All Might was roused from his thoughts about the future to see a familiar pink face. Not at all, young Ashido. I was just talking with young Midoriya here about how well his training is going. Mina had, at some point, approached the 2 One for All wielders, likely to talk with Izuku. All Might was pleased to see the relationship between the two was still going strong. He wasn't one to try to butt in too much to people's private affairs, but from what he had seen and heard they were quite happy together. Though to be honest, their relationship still surprised him a little. Izuku was pretty much the last person he expected to start dating someone. He was shy, awkward, anxious, everything Mina was not. And perhaps that was why their relationship seemed to work so well, they each had what the other lacked. One would have to be blind to not see the effect they had had on each other. Izuku had become a bit more easygoing and comfortable around others and had grown more confident in his own abilities. He still had lapses of self-doubt, as seen just moments ago, but moments like those were few and far between. As for Mina, she simply seemed more driven than she used to be. Not to say she didn't have any drive to her before, she was easily one of the most energetic students All Might had ever seen, but she had always lacked focus. Watching her train, though, that no longer seemed to be the case. She was pushing herself to her limits and beyond every day, just like a certain green-haired student of his. You look like you've made some headway as well, All Might said to Mina. Those techniques you're developing with that new form of acid are quite impressive. You think so? The pink girl beamed with pride. Thanks. I'm still trying to figure out the best ways to use it, so I'm just kinda trying anything right now. You see my acid veil move yet? Her teacher nodded. Just be sure not to neglect your fundamentals. Special moves are important, but you shouldn't rely on them for everything. Right. Mina nodded. You've both come a long way since you first started here. Keep up the good work. All Might smiled, giving another thumbs Minasup before walking off. There were still others he wanted to speak to, after all. Looking back, he watched Mina sit down next to Izuku and started to chat with him. She moved her arms excitedly as she described something, likely a move she was working on. He had a smile on his face as he listened attentively. Knowing everything he had been through all his life, seeing his ward smile like that meant a lot to All Might. Mina was truly a kind soul, and he was grateful she was able to make Izuku feel that kind of joy. Which is why keeping the truth from her hurt that much more. As far as the former pro could tell, Mina still had no clue about the truth behind his and Izuku's relationship. She had come face to face with All for One, but she had no idea who he really was. Izuku had kept his promise and not told a soul about what his quirk really was. But All Might could tell how difficult that was becoming. His protege hadn't brought up telling Mina about One for All ever since their first conversation, but it was clear he wanted to. Every time he and All Might spoke in private, the boy looked like he always had something more to say. Something he wanted to ask. But he never mentioned it, and his mentor never questioned him on it. All Might didn't like keeping it all from her. He didn't like how much it upset Izuku. But it was the way things needed to be. Telling Mina was simply too risky, especially with the way things were now. Their relationship was still fairly young. While it seemed stable and healthy now, who knows what could happen in a few months' time? What if something happened between them and, in the heat of the moment, she blurted the secret out? It wasn't something All Might hoped would happen to them, but the fact of the matter was that it could. Answer, the truth would stay hidden. One day, when Izuku could truly call One for All his own, he would be free to do what he wished with it. Should he and Mina still be together, whether he told her or not would be solely up to him. But until then, protecting the secret was top priority. I know you understand, kid, the man said with a sigh before turning around and continuing on his way. Mina returned to the section Smentos had set up for her in order to continue practicing her techniques. After her conversation with Izuku, she had a few new ideas she wanted to test out with her new acid. The two of them had been bouncing ideas off each other ever since their training here had started, and it had proven to be quite helpful. Izuku's natural ability to think outside the box and strategize led to him giving her all sorts of cool new things to try over the past several days, even if only a few of them turned out to have any practical use. On top of experimenting, the acid wielder had decided to take All Might's suggestion to heart. She had been focusing a bit too much on playing around with special moves lately. Perhaps some practice with long-range attacks would be a good idea? As she recalled his words, Mina turned to look at the now retired symbol of peace. He was back in his usual spot, watching her classmates continue their training. She tried to follow his eyes to where he was looking now. Of course. As expected, All Might was currently watching Izuku as he sparred with one of Ectoplasm's many clones that was stationed in the gym. Mina looked back and forth between her teacher and boyfriend a few times. Seeing them conversing had caused some familiar thoughts to stir in her head. Everyone in 1A was, of course, blown away by the announcement of All Might's retirement, as well as the drastic change in his appearance. His scrawny, almost sickly-looking form had taken a lot of getting used to for everyone, including Mina. They understood he was the same All Might inside, of course, but it was still quite a shock. When she first heard the news that he was retiring, the first thing Mina thought of was how Izuku must have been taking it. She, more than anyone else here, knew just how much All Might meant to him, and how much seeing his idol in that state must have hurt. She saw how he had wept while everyone cheered as the shriveled form, the symbol of peace, stood triumphant over All for One. He knew he was seeing the end of his hero. And yet he seemed to have gotten over it so quickly. Izuku had a strong will, of course. Stronger than just about anyone Mina had ever met. She knew he wouldn't let the fall of All Might keep him down, that he would keep moving forward. But she still couldn't help but feel something was wrong. There were a lot of little things she noticed ever since moving to the school dorms. Such as how everyone had been a little unsettled by All Might's new appearance at first, except Izuku. She had seen him talking when the now full-time teacher was initially going around giving advice the first day of training, and she couldn't help but notice how normal Izuku to be acting. But whenever the subject of All Might's current state came up among friends, it was a different story. It was then that Izuku acted like Mina expected him to, or at least, so it seemed. She had been with long enough to recognize all the subtle tells in his expressions and body language. She had always been pretty good at reading people in that sort of way, and with him she had become something of an expert. Which is why, during those conversations, she noticed something off with his behavior. Little ticks here and there that she wasn't used to seeing when he was in that sort of mood. She never bothered to ask him about any of this. For all she knew, he was just acting funny because he was having trouble coping with All Might's fall. Or maybe she was just being paranoid for no reason. However, just moments ago, she had overheard a little of the conversation between her boyfriend and All Might. The way the hero spoke to Izuku seemed weird. It was very different from the how he talked to her. More familiar, personal, like they had spoken about that kind of stuff many times before. Again, it was very subtle, but Mina knew how to recognize these sorts of things. It had gotten her thinking about all this stuff again. On their own, none of these things she had noticed seemed that strange. But putting them all together. Gah, what am I thinking? ? Shaking her head, Mina tried to refocus on her current task. She was reading way too much into things. She knew Izuku. If there's seriously some kind of secret history between him and All Might, he would be telling everyone about it. He was the guy's biggest fan, after all. And even if he hadn't told anyone, he would have told her by now. He had always been honest with her about everything. His willingness to be open to her was pretty much the whole reason they even started dating in the first place. It was one of the things she loved most about him. Of course he would tell her about something like that. ... Right ? Man, can't they give us, like, another week ? One feel like we deserve it after all the crap we've been through, Kaminari whined. Hey man, think of this way, we don't have to get up as early anymore since we're right next to the school, Kirishima said, trying to cheer his friend up. This was the last day of summer break, and a good chunk of 1A wasn't exactly excited about that fact. Yeah, I guess that's something, Kaminari admitted, taking some comfort in the fact that he could sleep in a bit. It also means you guys don't have an excuse to be late anymore, Suyu added, earning glares from the spiky-haired duo. Indeed. I expect everyone to arrive at class on time and ready to learn tomorrow. Ida was as fired up as ever, already getting back into class rep mode for the coming semester. Being the last day of break, the class had decided to take part in another group dinner. Everyone had all chipped in to make a curry dish, which they were all currently enjoying. Izuku watched his friends bicker as some of the others tried to hold in their laughter. He always enjoyed spending time with everyone like this, surrounded by friends he had been through so much with. A lot had happened in their first semester as UA students, and he had a feeling the next one would be just as crazy. Mina ? You okay ? Uraraki's question made Izuku look to his girlfriend, who was sitting on his right. She was staring down at her food with her chin resting on a hand. She didn't seem to hear Uraraka. Mina ? Blinking a couple of times, the pink girl looked up at the brunette. Sorry, you say something ? Uraraka looked at her with slight concern. You look a little out of it. Something wrong ? Mina shook her head. Nah, I'm good. Just a little tired, that's all. Training was extra tough today. She gave a small smile to reassure that she was fine. Alright, just checking. Satisfied, Uraraka returned to the conversation with everyone else. Izuku continued to look at Mina, who was now picking at her meal. She had been acting like this ever since they had gotten out of training. She claimed it was due to exhaustion, but he knew better. Mina had never been one to hide her feelings. She was extremely expressive, and one could generally tell what sort of mood she was in just by watching her. And currently, Izuku could tell something was bothering her. What it was, he didn't know. She had been perfectly fine this morning, after all. Had something happened during training ? Was she getting anxiety about the new semester ? He wanted to ask, but he figured if she wanted to bring it up she would. He'd wait until dinner was done and the two of them were able to speak in private. Whatever it was, Izuku was sure he could help her out. Mina stood in front of the elevator, tapping her foot impatiently. Sometimes she hated being on the top floor. It had been a pretty busy evening in the dorms. 1A had more or less decided to throw a small party due to it being their last day of break. There had been a sizable dinner, games, and music as the students enjoyed their final night of freedom from the classroom. Normally Mina would have been ecstatic for such an event, but she was actually one of the first ones turning in for the night. As much as she wanted to enjoy the festivities, she just couldn't shake these weird thoughts she was having about Izuku and All Might. She had tried to dismiss them earlier, but they ended up crawling their way back into her head shortly after she finished training. Why was this bothering her so much? Just yesterday, she was cooking dinner for Izuku and cuddling up in bed with him, telling him, kind of, that she loved him. Now she was standing here, wondering if he was hiding some weird nebulous secret. Wait, no, she wasn't thinking that. She trusted Izuku with everything she had. He would never do something like that. So why was she still thinking about this? Mina? Upon hearing her boyfriend's voice, her body involuntarily tensed up for a split second. Turning around to see a very concerned-looking Izuku, she forced herself to smile. Hey Izu, what's up? This whole thing was ridiculous. Is there something wrong? Damn it. She hated how bad she was at hiding her mood sometimes. She couldn't just say no. He'd know she was lying. But what was she supposed to do? Do you want to talk about it? We can go to my room or something, Izuku offered. He hadn't even waited for an answer. Mina sighed. Yeah, okay, screw it. She knew this wasn't going to stop unless she asked him about it. It'd be simple, all she'd do is ask about him and All Might, he'd obviously tell her nothing was going on, and she could stop worrying about this. Hopefully he wouldn't take it the wrong way. She did trust him, really. Her brain was being a real bitch right now. They walked to Izuku's room, shutting the door behind him as they went inside. The concerned boy turned to face her. Should we sit down or something? She hated how much this was worrying him. He thought there was something seriously wrong, when in reality it was just her making a big huff about nothing. No, it's fine. She took a deep breath. Alright, look, this is going to sound stupid. Like, really stupid. Just promise me you'll give me a straight answer. Izuku now looked more confused than anything. Mina, please, promise me. He looked a bit surprised by her interruption. Alright, I promise. Mina nodded, trying to figure out the best way to approach this. She quickly decided on her usual method, direct and blunt. Okay, again, this is going to sound dumb and weird, but, another breath. Is there something going on with you and All Might? Like, something I don't know? God, it sounded really stupid when she said it out loud. She waited for him to laugh. She waited for him to ask if she was joking, if this was seriously what was bothering her. Something like that. Anything like that. But Izuku did none of those things. Instead, he stared at her with an expression she had never seen him make before. There was no real emotion to it, just a blank, wide-eyed stare. He was completely silent. What was going on? Izu? This seemed to snap him out of it as he now looked extremely perplexed. Me and All Might? What? No, nothing, I haven't. He tilted his head. What makes you think that? There, those were the words Mina was hoping to hear. So why the weird face? Why the hesitation? Why the odd body language she was seeing right now? No. Mina? She could tell by his face that she looked the same way she felt. What's with that face? There was a feeling welling up inside of her that she couldn't exactly describe. But it didn't feel good. You're lying. Her voice was one of complete and utter disbelief. She didn't want to accept it, but Izuku had lied. Something was, in fact, going on. Why are you? I'm not. Panic overtook the boy as he held up his hands. I'm serious, there's nothing. The cold, hollow feeling Mina was experiencing quickly began to fade. In its place came something much worse. Do you think I'm stupid? Izuku froze, the sudden bite in Mina's voice catching him off guard. You really think I can't tell when you're bullshitting me? Her voice was growing louder as anger began to bubble up inside her. Not only was clearly lying, he was trying to deny the fact that he was. Mina, please. Why? Why are you lying to me, Izuku? Reason was no longer with the girl as her mind grew clouded with fury. What else had he not told her? How long had he been keeping this from her? Mina, why? Izuku looked terrified as she took a step closer. She could feel tears beginning to form. It was as if her entire perception of Izuku was being shattered. I. Tell me. I can't. The second he blurted this out, the frightened boy slapped his hands over his mouth. He stared wide-eyed at Mina, whose rage seemed to die instantly. What ? That cold, hollow feeling returned, but stronger this time. What do you mean you can't ? He didn't get a chance to answer. Her distraught mind had already come up with its own reason why. Do you not trust me enough ? Why else could he not tell her? Whatever it was he couldn't tell her ? Mina suddenly felt sick to her stomach. She took a step back, her vision blurring. Izuku stepped toward her, holding a hand out. No, Mina, that's not. She was out the door before he could finish. She sprinted down the hall, ignoring the voice calling her name as she ran. Ignoring the elevator, she made for the stairs, climbing them as tears fell freely from her face. She didn't stop until she reached her room, slamming the door behind her as she locked it. It had taken several seconds for Izuku to fully grasp what had just happened. By the time he had started chasing after Mina, she was out of sight. He had called out to her, though she obviously didn't respond. It had all happened so fast. What he thought was going to be a regular conversation suddenly turned into that. It was the first time Mina had ever gotten mad at him like that. Hearing her yell at him like that had been scary, to say the least. He was still shaking slightly from the outburst. But worse than that was the gut-wrenching guilt he was now feeling. He understood why she had gotten so distraught. He had, in fact, lied to her face, then tried to deny it when she called him out on it. Why the heck did he think he could get away with that ? Mina had always been good at reading him. But at the same time, what else could he say ? Despite the burning desire to tell her everything about All Might and One for All, he had made a promise. One that he couldn't break no matter what. He had already spoken to All Might about this once before, and the hero's answer was clear: Mina wasn't to be told. But somehow, she had figured it out. At least, she had figured out there was something she didn't know about. Izuku shouldn't have been so surprised. With how close they had grown, it made sense that she had eventually noticed something. He couldn't keep his guard up all the time, after all. The distraught boy's heart was pounding. He hadn't the slightest clue what to do now. Everything between them had gone so smoothly up until now. Was there something else he could have said ? Could he have made up a story ? No, she would have seen right through it. Was he supposed to just go, yes, but I can't tell you what ? Sure, that wouldn't have caused any problems. But still, his first instinct was to just lie like that ? Try to play dumb ? What was he thinking ? You don't trust me enough ? Izuku winced as he recalled the last words Mina said to him before running off. She sounded so betrayed. And she was right to feel that way. He had broken her trust, at the end of the day, and he had no idea how to make things right. But he was certainly going to try. Resolving to try to talk to her, the green-haired boy made his way toward the elevator. He hadn't the slightest clue what he was going to say, or if Mina would even listen, but he couldn't just stand here and do nothing. However, as he stood there waiting for the doors to open. Hey, Deku. Izuku's body involuntarily tensed up as he heard Bakugo's voice call out to him. This was not the time for this. He turned to look at his old friend, who was quickly approaching him with a fierce look in his eye. Kaken ? What's minus? Come with me. It sounded like an order more than a request. We need to talk. For a second, Izuku thought he misheard. Bakugo wanted to talk to him ? I'm kind of busy. He looked back at the elevator, which was just about to reach their floor. It's about your quirk. Izuku's head snapped back towards Bakugo. My quirk ? He tried to hide the nervousness in his voice. Yeah, your quirk. And whatever the fuck All Might has to do with it. The wielder of One for All's blood ran cold. Had Bakugo also figured something out ? What was happening today? ? The elevator doors opened, but Izuku didn't walk through them. He wanted to talk to Mina, but he knew he couldn't just ignore this. It almost sounded like Bakugo had actually found out about One for All. He let out a loud sigh. All right. Mina laid face first on her bed, clutching a pillow in her arms as she sobbed into it. The casing was thoroughly soaked by this point. She had been like this for some time. Her mind was a violent vortex of anger, grief, heartbreak, and so many other awful feelings. Why was this happening? What had she done wrong? All this time, she was convinced she and Izuku had complete trust in one another. That they could and would tell each anything. She had been upfront with him about everything. She had told him nothing but the truth. But it seemed his trust in her wasn't as real as she thought it was. Why else would have said those things? Why else would he have just lead? Why? Why didn't he trust her? What had she done to make him doubt her like that? She hiccuped. Her tears were beginning to slow, but she certainly didn't feel any better. Her heart felt like it had sunken to the bottom of her stomach, and she still felt somewhat sick. After a few more minutes, the heartbroken girl's crying finally ceased. She simply couldn't push out any more tears at this point. She rolled over so that she was on her back, sniffling. Was this it? After everything she'd gone through with Izuku, was this how things ended between them? Was her love all for nothing? She squeezed her eyes shut, a few more drops leaking out as she did. A buzz from her phone got her attention. She ignored it for a moment, but then decided to at least see who it was. She was a little surprised a message had been sent by not Izuku, but Kirishima. Hey, you okay? You seemed a little weird tonight. Mina groaned. Yeah, I'm fine, don't worry, just tired. It wasn't true, of course, but she didn't really want to get anyone else involved in this. As she exited out of her messenger, she winced as her phone's background appeared. It was a picture of her and, who else, Izuku. She had taken it during one of their nights at the camp during dinner. There was a pain in her chest as she stared at the picture. She wanted to look away, but for some reason she couldn't take her eyes off of it. Off of him. His smile in the shot was so pure. Like he was truly happy to be there with her, their cheeks squeezing together as she had hugged him with one arm. Had he been faking that too? No, he couldn't have been. The countless little moments like that they'd had together, those were real. Every smile, every laugh, every blush, every kiss, she had felt true compassion from him through it all. Including last night. Heck, including this morning. How could one display that much genuine feeling for another if they didn't have complete trust in him? And him refusing to tell her whatever secret he had suggested otherwise. It just didn't add up. Unless that wasn't why he hadn't told her? Mina's eyebrows furrowed as she thought. She hadn't even tried to consider the possibility that he had a completely different reason for not explaining himself. Perhaps his connection with All Might was due to some dangerous secret, and he was trying to protect her? Maybe it was just something All Might considered a private matter, and Izuku didn't want to just tell her without asking permission? It couldn't have been anything nefarious. There was no way either of those two would be involved in anything illegal. That Mina was certain of. The more she thought about it, the more likely it seemed that him lying had nothing to do with a lack of trust. As she realized this, her grief started to become replaced by a new feeling, guilt. Shit. She had acted like a complete child. She had let her emotions get the better of her, not even giving Izuku a chance to try to explain himself. She just automatically assumed the whole thing was about her, and she had flipped out on him because of it. Immature. Selfish. Stupid. 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 She repeated out loud, hitting the side of her head with each word. Maybe there was a better way he could have explained himself. Maybe he could have at least owned up to lying. But the fact of the matter was that she had acted completely out of line. And she needed to make amends. Springing to her feet, she quickly made her way out of her bedroom. She just hoped she hadn't screwed things up too much. Kaken, we really shouldn't be out here this late, Izuku said quietly, looking around. Bakugo said nothing as he continued to walk at a brisk pace. He hadn't said a word since they headed out. The two of them had walked for well over 10 minutes now. Izuku continued to pester his companion the whole way, trying to figure out where they were going. The normally loud and impatient blonde kept his mouth shut, however. Then the buildings came into view. Both students were silent as they entered one of UA's many training facilities, built to look like a real city. Class 1A had undergone many intense exercises here. But to Izuku and Bakugo, there was a particular spot that held special significance. Sure enough, the green-haired boy was led to a very familiar building. This is, Izuku started. This is where we fought in combat training for the first time. Bakugo finished for him, his back turned to his old friend. Where I lost. Honestly, just thinking about it still makes me feel sick to my stomach. He turned his head ever so slightly so that he was looking at Izuku. You were a good-for-nothing quirkless bitch, yet somehow, you got accepted into UA. And what's more, your quirk just suddenly manifested out of nowhere. Right? Izuku gulped. Based on what the blonde had told him earlier, he might have some idea about the truth behind said quirk. And ever since then, you've just been growing more and more and more, always keeping up ahead of the rest of us. I wouldn't say. Shut up and listen. Izuku jumped at the sudden increase in volume. Bakugo turned his head again so he wasn't looking at the startled boy. Let me ask you something. And be fucking straight with me, got it? He paused. I put you through a lot of shit over the years. But no matter what I did, you never treated me any different. Like we were still friends or some shit. Another pause. Izuku stayed quiet, uncertain where Bakugo was going with this. When that sludge villain grabbed me, you tried to save me. Despite the fact that you knew you were a helpless weakling. Despite the fact I'd told you to jump off a fucking building that same day, you still came for me. An inhale, then an exhale. And now we're here, about to start our second semester at UA. You could have told the staff about our history any time. I'm sure they would have kicked me out if you warded shit right. Izuku was stunned. He would never have done something like that. Point is, you've got every reason to hate me, and you've had every chance to get back at me for it all. And yet you still act like nothing's changed. I'm still, Kaken, to you. Bakugo suddenly whipped around, glaring. Why the fuck is that? Izuku took a moment to carefully think about his response. Because heroes don't hold grudges. Bakugo, surprisingly, stayed quiet, letting him continue. I don't know why you had such a problem with me, but, deep down, I know you're still the same Kaken. Like I told you back with that sludge villain, I couldn't just stand there and watch you die. It didn't matter how you treated me, or how powerless I was. The explosion wielder's eyes were hidden beneath his hair, though his grit teeth suggested he wasn't happy. And as for UA, I would never try and sabotage someone's dream like that. No matter who they are, but especially not you. You're an annoying piece of shit, you know that? Bakugo growled. Izuku sighed, wondering if he had even heard any of that. But all that nonsense you're spewing, the blonde looked his classmate dead in the eye. I guess that's why All Might gave you that quirk, huh? The one for all wielder's heart skipped a beat. Hearing someone blurt it out so directly caught him off guard. You once told me someone gave you your quirk. I figured you were just fucking with me, making fun of me, but that ain't how you are, right? Bakugo began to pace. The boss of those villains, the guy who knew All Might, he could take and give quirks like it was nothing. That's why one of the cats had to retire. That's why those Nomu fuckers had multiple quirks. There was another pause. Izuku simply followed his movements with his eyes. So quirk transfer is actually a thing, and All Might's connected to it. And it wasn't until you met him that you started to change. On top of that, All Might's lost his power now. So, he stopped, facing his old friend. He wouldn't give me a straight answer when I asked. So I'm asking you now. Got it? Izuku could feel sweat on his face. Bakugo had come up with an incredibly sound theory. You ain't denying it, means I'm right, doesn't it? The two gave each other a long, hard look. This is what Izuku got for letting that little detail slip way back then. If I tell you the truth, how will that help you? At the end of the day the question remained, why did Bakugo care? Yet another silence. The tension in the atmosphere was starting to build. You and me, we always looked up to All Might. Always aspired to be like him. You remember, right? A rare smirk formed on Bakugo's lips as he said this. And the guy who I thought was just a damn pebble on the side of the road, before I knew it, you were the one being acknowledged by the guy the first look up to most. He deemed you, useless fucking Deku, worthy of his legendary quirk. And that's why. Izuku's eyes went wide at his classmate's next words. You're gonna fight me. Right here, right now. Izu, you out here ? One wanna talk. Mina called out to the night air as she walked, hoping Izuku was in earshot. He hadn't been in his room when she looked, and he hadn't been with the few others who were still awake. None of them had seen him, either. Answer, she decided to search for him outside the dorm. There was definitely a chance he had run off after her little outburst. Come on, where are you ? She thought out loud. This was just making her feel worse about the whole ordeal. Maybe she had missed him, and he had gone back inside ? She had been out here for a while now. Sighing, the pink girl turned around to head back to the building. The distant sound of a large explosion made her nearly jump out of her shoes. What the hell? ? She turned towards the direction of the sound. A few seconds later, a similar noise rang out. Was that Bakugo ? His explosions didn't have a distinct sound to them or anything, but she had no idea what else could be causing something like that. Curiosity getting the better of her, she decided to investigate. Besides, if Izuku was out here, he might be heading towards the noise as well. Before long, she found herself at Ground Beater, the small city-like facility used for combat training. The sounds were definitely coming from here. As she got closer to the source, voices could be heard. Her eyes went wide as she realized she recognized them. Bakugo and Izuku were here. And from the sounds of it, they were fighting ? Izuku gasped for breath as he stared up at the night sky. His whole body ached, though none of it was broken. Despite his protests, he had ultimately been forced to accept Bakugo's challenge. It was the only way the two were ever going to truly move on from their shared past. The two of them went at each other full force, facing off for the first time since that first combat exercise. A lot more than punches and kicks were exchanged in the fight. This was the first time the two had truly spoken with one another in years, and all the built-up tension between them had finally come out. Izuku finally learned just why Bakugo seemed to despise him so much. He seemed to think, for whatever reason, the once quirkless boy had always looked down at him. Always considered himself superior. Obviously, that was completely untrue. Izuku had always admired Bakugo, looking up to him almost as much as he looked up to All Might. How his old friend could think that way was beyond him, but he made sure to drill it into the blonde's head that he had nothing but respect for him. The battle had got so heated that Izuku actually managed to push past his old limits. He had successfully controlled 8% of One For All's power, nearly doubling his previous cap of 5%. And yet, Bakugo loomed over him, pinning him to the ground as he held a hand out in front of his face. It hadn't been enough. I win. Izuku had been beaten. For a moment, the two remained in that position, staring at each other in silence. Finally, Bakugo rose to his feet. After a few seconds, he slowly extended his arm, offering a hand to his opponent. Get up, Izuku. Izuku blinked. Did he hear that right ? I said get up. After a moment's hesitation, he took the hand before getting pulled to his feet. Thank you. It was all the defeated student could manage to say as he caught his breath. I don't get it. Even with that power, you're still losing to me, why ? Even if Izuku had an answer, he wouldn't have had a chance to say it. That'll be the end of that, you two. The two students flinched as a third voice called out. Turning their heads, their jaws dropped. All Might ? Mina stayed in her hiding spot as All Might suddenly appeared. She was just about to run out and start screaming at the two combatants for being so reckless, but it seemed someone was going to beat her to it. Besides, she wanted to see if she could find out what the heck this was all about. Though as the three of them spoke, the more and more confusing things got. Why Deku ? Bakugo asked the lanky man that was All Might. Ever since that fight with the sludge villain, why him ? Mina ed her head. She vaguely recalled a report some time ago about that incident. Despite his powerlessness, he was more of a hero than anyone else, including me. I decided that it was my responsibility to help him stand in the arena, so to speak. What the heck was that supposed to mean ? The conversation went on for a while longer. Bakugo began yelling at All Might, apparently blaming himself for the latter's current condition. The former pro comforted him, or at least attempted to, before proceeding to lecture both of the boys about their shortcomings. Mina didn't exactly follow, but from what she could tell it seemed like the two of them had finally managed to, after sufficiently pounding on each other, reach some sort of understanding with each other. It seemed, perhaps, that Bakugo had taken some of her words to heart. Who else knows about you and Deku's relationship? Mina's eyes popped open at Bakugo's words. Recovery girl and the principal. Among the students, only you. Really? Bakugo looked at Izuku. Not Ashido? At the mention of this, her boyfriend looked at the ground, a sullen look on his face. I've instructed young Midoriya not inform her. So that was it. Well, if you're that intent on hiding it, I won't say anything to anyone. Mina was just about to step out of her hiding place, when All Might, wait. Izuku stood up straight, looking his teacher in the eye. Actually, about Mina. She stopped just before revealing herself. Young Midoriya, I believe we already discussed. She knows something's going on. Izuku actually interrupted his idol. She asked me about it and I didn't say anything. But, she knew I was lying. All Might seemed taken aback by this. I swear, I never mentioned any of it to her. She just figured it out. And now she thinks I don't trust her anymore. The former symbol of peace was quiet for a moment. Is that so? You have to let me tell her. The green-haired student was suddenly on his knees, hands folded. Please. I can't keep hiding this from her. He shouted. Hiding what from me? The three males all turned in unison as Mina stepped out. Mina. Young Ashido. Oh, for fuck's sake. The pink-haired girl slowly approached the group, eyes locked on Izuku as he rose to his feet. He stepped forward, walking toward her. The other two were silent as they closed the gap. For a moment, neither of them did or said anything. Eventually, Mina was the one to break the silence. With a hard slap to across the face. Ah! Izuku cried, clutching his cheek. What the hell were you thinking? Do you have any idea how worried I was watching that? What if you had broken something? How do you think I would feel? All Might stared blankly as he watched Mina chew her boyfriend out, jabbing a finger into his chest as she scolded him. Bakugo was howling with laughter. And you? The pink ball of fury turned her attention to said laughing student. I'm guessing you started this, right? You're lucky he's not hurt, or else I'd. Alright, that's enough, All Might interrupted the girl's raving, stepping forward. Behind him, Bakugo held out a middle finger at her. How long have you been here? I got here when after the fight started, Mina answered, folding her arms. The anger in her face quickly disappeared. What in the world were you all talking about? What's going on with you and Izu? All Might looked at her boyfriend, then back to her. He let out a heavy sigh. I guess there's no sense hiding it now. A stern look appeared on his face. But before I begin, I need you to promise me that you will not speak a word of this to anyone. Understand? Mina was a bit surprised by the sudden shift in his tone, but only for a moment. Right, I promise. All Might nodded. Well then, it's time for you to learn the truth about young Midoriya's quirk, and mine. So if I got this right, you really were quirkless, and All Might gave you his quirk? Mina rubbed her temples, trying to comprehend what she had just been told. She had always thought Izuku's quirk was similar to All Might's, but she had never expected it to actually be the same one. And giving quirks? Was that really possible? And that all for one guy, he could take them as well? Ugh. Her head hurt. That's the idea, yes, All Might said. He, Mina, and Izuku were still standing in the fake city. Bakugo had left before the explanation began, deciding he didn't need to stick around for the full story, as he called it. I'm sorry I didn't tell you. Izuku must have apologized at least a dozen times since they had started talking. As I said, please don't blame young Midoriya for withholding this. He's wanted to tell you since before you two went to camp. Mina looked over at her boyfriend, who was averting his eyes. But, I hope you can understand why I wished for him to keep this a secret. The pink girl folded her arms, narrowing her eyes as she looked at All Might. I guess. She then dropped the facade, grinning. Nah, I get it. Top secret hero stuff. The blonde-haired man nodded, giving a soft smile. Good to hear. Now remember, this is a closely guarded secret. It's imperative that you. I know. Not a word to anyone. Mina pretended to shingpi up her mouth, giving a thumbs Minasup. Right. Now then, I think it's time to head back. The couple said goodnight to their teacher as they entered the dormitory. As they walked into the common room, Mina stopped. Hey, can we talk for a bit? Izuku nodded. He was going to ask the same thing. The two of them walked over to the sofas, sitting down together. They stared at one another for a moment, an awkward silence in the air. Look, Izu. Mina, They both stopped speaking. You first. Izuku gave Mina the floor. Alright, she took a breath. Look, what I said earlier, in your room, the way I acted, her shoulders slumped slightly as he looked at the floor. That was, she shook her head. I overreacted, to say the least. Mina, Izuku thought he was the one who was going to be apologizing. I shouldn't have doubted you like that. I just assumed you weren't telling me about, well, I guess your quirk because you didn't trust me to keep it secret. And because of that, I just kinda lost it. The boy rested a hand on her shoulder. It's alright, really. You had every right to be mad at me for that. No, I really didn't. At least, not like that. I could have let you try to explain, at least, she let out a sigh. Man, being in love can really make you cry, zy. A deafening silence filled the air as the both of them processed what Mina had just said. Pink became magenta as her whole fit heated up. Oh god. Izuku felt as if his soul had left his body for a brief moment. Had he heard that correctly? What did you say? He could have sworn she said, love, but he might have just been hearing things. Mina squirmed a little but managed to build up the courage she needed as she turned to her boyfriend, grabbing his hands with her own. Screw it. She took a deep breath as she looked into his eyes. I love you, Izu. Izuku's brain nearly shut down right then and there. A feeling he couldn't really describe filled his as his heart rate increased. His hands were shaking as she held them, and his breathing grew faster. He had already been through so much today, and now this ? However, as he gazed into Mina's vibrant eyes, he began to calm down. As his mind and body entered a slightly more relaxed state, he found himself able to think clearly again. And thanks to everything that had happened tonight, he finally had an answer to that question All Might had asked him weeks ago. Do you love her? Perhaps it was too soon to say for sure. But right now, he didn't care. A tender smile formed on his lips. I love you too, Mina. He watched her face change from shock to disbelief to overwhelming joy in the span of about 4 seconds. Before he could say anything else, she practically leapt at him as she threw her arms around him, threatening to squeeze him to death with a hug. She squealed with delight before she began assailing his face with a barrage of kisses. He laughed as she did, falling over onto his back on the couch as she laid on top of him. She ended her assault, settling for one final kiss on his lips before pulling away. She looked down at him as she wore a toothy grin. We should probably get to bed, Izuku suggested, despite enjoying his current position under her. I'm probably already in enough trouble as is. 5 more minutes, Mina said, winking. Her boyfriend blushed, but smiled. Oh okay, 5 minutes. The gap between their lips closed. This time, though, Mina didn't pull away. Izuku held her as their kiss deepened. Finally, he had been able to be completely honest with her. Finally, he was able to truly figure out the full extent of his feelings for her. It was well over 5 minutes before the young lovers finally went to bed. Mina fidgeted in her seat, chewing on her pencil as her eyes followed Aizawa around the room. Classes had just ended for the day, and her homeroom teacher was currently handing back the first major math exam of the semester. Needless to say, she was a little anxious. Crap. A few seats ahead of her, Kaminari had just received his test. Judging from his face, the results were not what he had hoped for. Head hanging low, he got up and left the classroom. Others were also making their exit as they received the grades, a variety of expressions on their faces as they looked over their papers. It had been about 4 weeks since the end of break. Mina had tried to keep up with her studies as best she could, but she still found herself struggling on a lot of the material. She hadn't exactly felt confident during the exam. Aizawa reached her desk, thumbing through his stack to find her name. She closed her eyes, bracing herself for the bad news. Nice work, Ashido. Ha question mark. Reluctantly opening one eye, the horned girl peered down at the paper in front of her. It took her a second to realize she wasn't misreading it. 85%. B. No way, she cried, picking up the exam and quickly flipping through it. Indeed, there was considerably less red pen than she was used to seeing. Don't look so surprised. Mina stopped looking over her mistakes as she stared up at Aizawa. Based on your conduct as of late, it's obvious you've been taking your studies a lot more seriously. The quirk eraser had had substantially less problems with his pink student as of late, though he did still occasionally catch her daydreaming. She was still Mina, after all. Thank you, sir. Hearing praise from Aizawa was unusual, especially for her. However, there was always a, however, I know you can still improve. Don't let yourself stay satisfied with that score, understand question mark. Mina looked back at her exam. It was true, AB was nice and all, especially for her, but she could still do better. She looked back up at Aizawa, giving a firm nod. Yes, sir. A small smile crossed the teacher's lips. That's what I want to hear. With nothing more to say, he moved on to his next student. Taking one last look at her score, Mina stood up and quickly made her way over to a certain someone's desk. Izu. Check it out. She held up her exam, grinning proudly. Izuku, who was currently in the middle of putting his things away, smiled at her. That's awesome, Mina. See, I told you it would be okay. He had tried to assure her multiple times after the test that she had done fine. Yep. She laughed, feeling somewhat silly now for worrying so much. Especially considering about a week ago she had managed to pass a much more difficult test. The license exam had come and gone, and nearly all of 1A had made it through. The only two that failed were, much to everyone's surprise, Bakugo and Todoroki. Much of it had to do with their conduct during the rescue part of the test. Mina remembered the moment she realized she had actually passed. She had never felt so proud of herself. All of her hard work over the last month had paid off, and now she had taken one giant step closer toward becoming a real hero. And she would have never made it without this green-haired nerd beside her. It was funny thinking about this all here, in their classroom. This was where it had all begun, the first time the two of them had truly spoken with one another. That conversation that had first sparked the flames of love that now burned brightly in both their hearts. Oh, we still on for tonight question mark, she asked, remembering their plans. Izuku's face went flush as she said this. Evidently, he had forgotten. Yeah. He rubbed his arm. I don't have to sing, do I question mark, Mina scoffed. Of course you do. That's the whole point, she exclaimed, causing her boyfriend's face to turn even whiter. Oh come on, it'll be fun. She patted his cheek a couple times. There was no way in hell she was going to miss out on hearing Izuku sing karaoke. Izuku's face was positively glowing as he and Mina left the karaoke bar. That had to have been one of the scariest things he had ever done. You're not half bad, you know. We should do this again, Mina suggested, swinging her arm with his as they held hands. Again question mark, the poor boy wasn't sure his heart could take another night of that. He was surprised to get more cheers than laughs, but still. Oh come on, you can't tell me that wasn't fun. Well, she wasn't wrong. He couldn't deny he hadn't enjoyed himself at least a little. The place was noisy and full of people, something Izuku had never been too comfortable dealing with, but there was a certain energy to the place he couldn't help but get entranced by. Everyone was having so much fun, even if they couldn't really sing. There had been more than a few performances that could be considered poor, but people still cheered him on. Nothing but positivity all around, which Izuku enjoyed seeing. Plus, watching Mina really get into it was equal parts funny and cute. Even if her voice wasn't as good as she seemed to think. Yeah, I guess it was fun, he admitted. It was funny, he never would have even thought about setting foot in a place like that if it weren't for her. There were a lot of things Izuku wouldn't have done without Mina's encouragement. He'd experienced so much in the 2 months they'd been together. While karaoke had been incredibly embarrassing, the fact that he was even willing to do it showed how much more comfortable he had gotten around others lately. His girlfriend had played a big part in getting him to come out of his shell a bit more. Her vibrant personality was quite contagious. He thought about all the time they'd spent together. He was glad to see that her learning the truth about his quirk hadn't affected their relationship much, if at all. Mina didn't really see him any differently because of it. That meant quite a bit to the formerly quirkless boy. Just one of the many reasons why he loved her. They made their way back to campus, chatting about a variety of subjects along the way. It was pretty late by the time they returned. Fortunately, they didn't have classes tomorrow to worry about. As they entered the dorms, they could hear the sound of their classmates in the common area. From the sounds of it, there was some sort of movie night going on. "Oh, that sounds like fun, let's go join them," Mina exclaimed as she started to pull Izuku toward the common area. Actually, she stopped as he spoke up, turning to face him. Can we go upstairs instead? His face was cooking. Once again, it spoke volumes about the effect Mina had had on him that he was the one suggesting this. But all that excitement at the karaoke bar had put him in a mood. His girlfriend's lips curled into a devilish grin. "Well, if you insist." Izuku finally pulled away, gasping for breath as Mina sat up a bit. He was currently on his bed, lying on his back with Mina atop him. Needless to say, things got heated fairly quickly once they got to his room. Ever since they'd confessed their love for each other, the couple had shared some rather intimate moments together. At some point during this particular encounter, Izuku had managed to lose his shirt. Not the first time it had happened, actually. That said, there was always a limit. Izuku had admittedly seen and touched a bit more of Mina than he'd like to admit, but things had never gone past a certain point. "You wanna stop?" Mina asked between breaths. Unsurprisingly, it was almost always Izuku who decided when they'd gone far enough. His lover had learned how to recognize when he was beginning to become uncomfortable, or when he had simply just had enough for the time being. Usually, at this point, he would have said yes. But tonight was different. Whether he had gained some sort of confidence boost from singing, or his hormones were simply finally getting the better of him, he wasn't sure. But one way or another. No, he shook his head. Mina seemed a bit surprised. He paused, taking a moment to really think about this. He was ready. Mina took a long, hard look at him. It seemed she understood. "Are you sure? Only if you are." For a moment, neither of them moved. Suddenly, she was on him, attempting to simultaneously kiss him and take off her shirt. He assisted with the removal of her clothing as he finally let his lust overtake him. "I love you," Izuku gasped between kisses. Love you too." The shirt hit the floor. It wasn't long before the rest of their outfits joined it. Mineta exited his room, a small case in his hands. He, along with most of his class, had been enjoying a fun movie night that evening. While most of his suggestions had been shot down, he finally managed to convince his peers to let him show them one of his favorite films. Not counting adult films, at least. However, as he made his way toward the elevator, a strange noise made him stop. "Oh God, Izu." His head snapped in the direction of Izuku's room. That was Mina's voice, and he was very familiar with that sort of tone. He was next to the door in seconds, putting his ear up to it. He dropped his movie, a perverse grin appearing on his face. There was no mistaking those sounds. Izuku had finally done it. Mineta had never felt so proud. "Sheesh, how long's it going to take? Kaminari asked impatiently. "What's that little grape doing? Do you really want to know what's holding him up? Jiru asked. "Good point. Either way, we got plenty of other stuff to watch, so." SMMMMAAAAAAASH. The whole room jumped as there was a sudden yell. It was a bit muffled, as it had come from upstairs, but everyone had heard it well enough. Was that Midoriya? Jiru asked, looking at the ceiling. "I didn't even think he was here. What the hell was that scream for? Kirishima was equally confused. Everyone else in the room began to murmur, wondering what they had just heard. Is he okay? Uraraka sounded a bit concerned. Maybe we should go check on him and. No need. Midoriya's perfectly fine. Everyone turned to look at Mineta, who had just strolled into the room. More than fine, in fact. The heck's that supposed to mean ? Kirishima asked, raising an eyebrow. That, my friends, was the sound of Midoriya finally becoming a man. The shortest member of 1A put his hands on his hips, a huge grin on his face. There was a long, long silence. Kaminari looked around, a bit confused. What do you mean he, oh. The electricity wielder looked up at the ceiling again. So, that was. Oh god. Jiro put a hand on her stomach. Now anytime I hear that, all I'm gonna think about is, or. I don't understand. What did he do ? Ida was, unsurprisingly, completely oblivious as he turned to Todoroki, who shrugged. He was equally unsure. Uraraka didn't answer him either. She was too busy hiding her face in her hands as her face turned scarlet. It was bound to happen eventually. Tsuyu was completely unfazed, as usual. Kirishima was just laughing. For once, Bakugo was at a loss for words. The room buzzed with conversation from the rest of the class. Somehow, Izuku and Mina managed to get through the next day. And together, they'd get through many more days for many years to come. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.